Hello, I'm Jason Lightoller from Woodside, and today we're going to revisit the subject of joining your knitwear using a knitting machine. It doesn't particularly matter which gauge of knitting machine you're using, the principles are exactly the same, but we're going to go through the entire subject, and what we're going to do is join side seams, we're going to join tapered seams and curved seams. So we're going to start with the simplest one, and this is the straight side seam of a sweatshirt that I've made. And what you can see, if I pull this aside here is a stitch, here is another stitch, and here is another stitch, and so on and so forth, all the way up here. And what I'm doing is just taking the very outer edge. Don't take the first stitch there because that's only half a stitch. So the first column, the very outer column, is what you want to be picking up, this whole entire outer column. So in the middle of this outer column here, the entire column is what you're aiming to pick up. And you're going to go in the stitches. Now, in between the stitches are the knots. So if you look here, this part here, that's what's called a knot. Now, it's quite difficult to actually pick up the knots. You'd have to push your transfer tool all the way through. And for acrylic yarn, especially the higher end acrylic yarns, it's quite a difficult thing to do. So the tools, the three-prong transfer tool, has a natural habit of wanting to find its own way through to the individual stitches. I've just missed that needle there because it's quite difficult with this light fixture right in front of me. It has its own habit of wanting to find its way through to the individual stitches. Now, what you can do, if you find that difficult, you can just use the single-prong transfer tool or the double one to put the individual stitches on. But it's quite an easy thing to do using the three-prong tool, and you'll soon get really quick at it as you go all the way up the side seam and get towards the end of what you need to do. And it doesn't take very long at all. You just carry on going all the way up until you get to the very end. And there we are, we're right at the very end now. And as you can see, I've only taken the very outer edge there of this side seam, and we're going to hang the other side to match it on. Now, when it comes to hanging the other side onto the needles, it's a little bit more difficult because the purl side will be facing you, and the purl side has a tendency to roll inwards. So what you need to do is just unroll it and hang a little bit at a time. But it's the same principle. What you're doing is taking the stitches and you're only taking the very outer edge here. So if you put the transfer tool in, you can see that way that I'm still in the outer edge of the knitted garment there, and they're going on to the needles that way. And you keep going all the way up like that, avoiding the knots, and you just hook it onto the needles. And it's quite an easy thing to do once you get into the rhythm of it, and you will eventually be able to speed up and you'll be able to zip along in no time at all. So that's all hung onto the needles. I'm just going to push both of this back now to the needle beds. So it means that the knitting machine has a lot less work to do. And to make it a lot easier for the machine, I'm going to close the latches on the needles. Now, the very best way to do that is to use an expired credit card, and that will just slip under the latches and make sure that they're all closed. Keep the needles in holding position. And then you're going to thread up your carriages, and you will use the loosest tension, so tension 10 in this case on the standard gauge machine. And what we're going to do is just go across with the carriage for 2 passes. And then we're going to take a latch tool and cast off. So to do that, you put the hook of the latch tool into the stitch, lift it off the needle, bring a few more stitches forward, and then make sure that it goes right behind the latch there. Keep your finger on the latch, put it in to the new stitch there, lift it off, and then let it fall behind the latch. And then put your finger on the latch, put it into the new stitch, lift it off, and let it fall behind. Put your finger on, lift the new stitch off, and let it fall behind. Put your finger on, lift the new stitch off, and pull it through. let it fall behind. And you'll soon pick it up and get really fast at it. Now, I use this method because for me, it's the most stretchiest. Casting off for this particular purpose behind the gate pegs is a little bit too rigid. I use that at the start of a row, or if I'm doing buttonholes, pulling the needles forward to a holding position and then looping it through is far too precarious because you're actually putting the stitches behind the latches and they have a tendency to slip off. As you can see, using this method, the stitches are held securely in the latches and they won't fall off. And it's quite a speedy thing, really, and you will actually be able to cast off your entire seam in no time at all. So now we're going to look at slanted seams, and this is an underarm seam of a sleeve. And here is the cuff end, and we're going to go upwards towards the armhole. Now, with slanted seams, it's a little bit more tricky because you've obviously got the increases to take into effect. And whenever you've got increases or decreases, you don't have a regular selvage to take into effect here. You're going to have larger loops. So as you go along, you're going to see a larger loop here. And you just pick up that larger loop, as you can see what I've done. And after you've picked up your larger loop, you then just continue to pick up your stitches, and the knots will always be in between the 3 stitches there. And you can use the 3-prong transfer tool, or as I've already explained, you can just do this one by one. And when you eventually come to a larger loop, which is here, then you just put that on the single needle. And then, as you can see here, this is a knot which you would avoid, and next to the knot will be your stitch that you would pick up. You would avoid that knot there, and then you would pick up your single stitch. And then you continue going along as you would do in the normal way. So again, here's 3 stitches. We're just going to hook those on. And there's another knot there. So we're just going to go in between those knots and pick up the stitches. And as you can see here, there's the larger loop where the increase would have been. And you continue going all the way up, and then you would just match up as you get to the armhole. So again, it's exactly the same when we've got the purl side facing us. You hang the larger loops on a smaller needle, you avoid these knots here, and then you go to the individual stitches and hang them on. And you will have difficulty in actually putting the purl side on because it has the tendency to roll inwards. But there's nothing you can do about that. And once you get used to it, it's actually quite an easy thing, and it doesn't take long at all. So that's all done. I'm going to move both of these edges back together so they're flat against the needle bed. And then what I need to do is make sure that I'm taking a note of how many needles I hang this underarm seam over, because I obviously want both sleeves to match. And I've hung this over 125 needles, and I need to make sure that both are the same. Now we go across the needle bed with the expired credit card to close all the latches. And again, at the loosest tension, we're going to leave the needles in the holding position and run the carriage across for 2 rows. And then we just take the latch tool and cast off. So now we're going to look at curved seams, in particular the set-in sleeve. And this edge here is the armhole seam. And as you can see, I've put the entire armhole seam here. Again, just as we did before, the very edge along the needle bed here. And again, it's only using the very outer stitch there, just as we did before. There's nothing different there. And what you do is you follow the curve as you go all the way around to the very end of the armhole. Now, you don't apply any stretch to this. You just put it onto the machine as it is. There's no need to stretch or to shrink it. And you've got to make sure that when you do this side, you match the other side as well. So as I said, 85 either side of 0 for this side. So when we go to do the other sleeve, it's going to be 85 at either side of 0. Now, because this is a curve, we can't put the whole sleeve on in one whole piece. We'll have to do it in 2 halves because the curve of the upper sleeve here won't fit around the entire curve of the armhole. because this is actually curved at the top here and the needle bed is straight, so it won't stretch out that far. So what we're going to do is put the sleeve on in 2 halves, and that's quite an easy thing to do. So the right side of the garment is facing you, so therefore we're going to take the wrong side of the sleeve, and the wrong side, the pearl side, is going to be facing you this time because we want the right sides of the garment to be matching. And as you can see here, what I did is I put a marker at the top of this sleeve piece here just before I cast off, and I'm going to put that at the center 0 needles here. These are the center 0 needles. If I just move these loose threads away, you can see the 0 point there. I'm going to put these 2 back on, and that will mark the exact center of where the sleeve is. So where this marker is there, I'm just going to put these 2 stitches back on to the center 0 needles there. And that means that the dead center of the top of the sleeve is in the center of the armhole, because the center 0 here is where the shoulder point is on the garment. So therefore there is no danger of the sleeve being mismatched. And as you can see, what I did here is I used a normal latch tool cast off rather than waste yarn. And I did that because that will give more stretch than using a waste yarn cast off in order for us to put the sleeve on with the most maximum amount of stretch at the top there. So starting at one end of the armhole, it really doesn't matter which end, then you just as we did before, we're just going to hook the very edge of the sleeve piece back onto the needles, and we keep going up like that, just as we did with the other selvage edge, just like that, until we get to the middle of the center point, which is where it will join the shoulder seam, and that's where we're going to stop. So we're coming up to the point in the sleeve cap, which has the most curve, and again, you just roll it outwards and take the very outer point there. This is the point there where we started the decreases, probably 5 stitches at a time, and then it went down to 1 stitch every couple of rows, depending on your pattern. Just make sure that at the top you've caught off in a straight line and you've got a nice curve that goes round. So that's that. What we're going to do is push this back towards the back of the needle bed, and any loose ends of yarn will just weave up and under the needles, probably about 4 or 5 needles. Don't have to do too many, just to secure that, and then we'll take those bits off later on. And then it's the same thing as before. We'll take the credit card and close all the latches. But what we're going to do is move these needles up until just behind the latches here, but we're only going to go to the right of 0, because what we're going to do is leave the rest in hold. We're then going to put the carriage into hold and do 2 passes at tension 10, just to join the 2 together. And then we're going to take the latch tool and cast all this off. So it's just the same thing as before. It will take you a while just to get the first few stitches off, because we're going to go from the middle to the end there. But once you've got the memento going, it really is no problem at all. So that's that half of the sleeve done. I'm just going to take the credit card again and just open up all these latches just to make it easier to put the other half of the sleeve onto the needles. And it's exactly the same as what we've just done. And we just go into the very outer edge of the sleeve seam there. I've just missed out the outer edge part there onto that first needle. And we just hook the remaining part on, just as we've just done already. So again, the edge has been pushed back to meet the sleeve edge there. I've woven the loose ends in and I've closed the latches. We're just going to go across with the carriage. But it would help if I take it off of hold. Let's take this off of hold. and we're going to take the latch tool and we're going to cast off. And clearly, because we're going from the edge this time, it's a lot easier to start the cast off. The first time when you do this, because you're going from the center to the outside, it is a little bit tricky to start off, but once you get the memento going, as I said, the first time, it's a lot easier. So now what we need to do is just trim off these ends that we wove in, and you just take a pair of scissors and you go around and you just trim them off. So the last thing to talk about is how to hang live stitches onto a selvage. And in particular, this would be if you are putting on a drop sleeve or something like that. Now, this isn't a proper garment, of course. This is just a test piece that I've done because the garment that I've just shown you had set-in sleeves, as you saw. So what I've done here is just made a mock-up. And as before, there's no difference at all, is I've put the selvage right up against the needle bed, again, avoiding the knots and just putting the very outer edge in through the stitches only. And here is the pretend drop sleeve. Here's the live stitches and the waist yarn. Now, this is really helped if you do the waist yarn 2 tensions tighter than the main yarn, and then you won't have any difficulty picking up these live stitches at the top. So what you do is you just take your transfer tool and you go in to the first 3 stitches, and then you just literally hook them onto the needles like that. Once you've got them on, you carry on going all the way down, and you have to make sure that you've got the first 3 on, 3 or 6, and then you can put a claw weight on, because they do have a tendency to jump out. So just put a claw weight on there, and then you keep going all the way down. If you put a bit of tension to the side, it's even easier to pick up the stitches. And then there's absolutely no issue at all. Now, do check periodically as you go along that you've actually got every stitch, because if you haven't, then what happens is that once you go to take the waist yarn out, once you finish casting off, the whole lot will run, and that's just a complete disaster. So you keep going all the way down until all the stitches are on the needles. So that's that. Again, everything is back against the knitting machine bed, and it's the same old routine. Make sure the latches are closed, and this does help the knitting machine greatly. We'll thread the carriage up and away we go. And it's the same thing as before, just a latch tool cast off. So the final thing to do now is, after I finish this, is just to give all of these seams a shot of steam, as I've already uploaded a video and shown you how to do that. Please do refer to it, and then I'll show you what they all look like. So all the seams have been steamed, and this particular one here is the side seam that we did. As you can see, it's very flat and everything is aligned perfectly here, and the seam is virtually imperceptible. This is the underarm seam, the one that tapers out, and this is the cuff end here, and it tapers up towards the top of the armhole. And as you can see, again, it's very flat, and again, it's matching perfectly here. This is the curved seam. This is the set-in sleeve. As you can see, it's perfectly round and smooth, and it continues, of course, all the way around the back there, and it matches perfectly. And there are no sharp, jagged edges that you sometimes get with a sleeve that's actually been put in haphazardly. And finally, here is the mock drop shoulder sleeve. This would be the main part of the garment, of course. Here is the shoulder line, and here is the sleeve. As you can see, again, it's very flat. The sleeve line is very imperceptible there, and everything is lying flat and smooth. I do hope this tutorial was useful for you. It's certainly a worthwhile consideration if you don't have any other mechanical means of joining up your knitwear.